Chapter 3, Escape. The barn was very large. It was very old. It smelled of hay and it smelled of manure. It smelled of perspiration of tired horses and the wonderful sweat breath of patient cows. It often had the sort of peaceful smell as though nothing bad could ever happen in the world. It smelled of grain and of harness dressing and of grease and of rubber boots and of new rope. And whatever the cat was given, a fish head or something to eat, the barn would smell of fish. But mostly it smelled like hay, for there was always hay in the great loft up overhead, and there was always hay being pitched down to the cows and the horses and the sheep. The barn was pleasantly warm in the winter, and the animals spent most of their time indoors. It was pleasantly cold in the summer when the big doors stood wide open to the breeze. The barn had stalls on the main floor for the work horses, tie-ups on the main floor for the cows, a sheepfold down below for the sheep, and a pig pen down below for Wilbur. It was full of all sorts of things you'd find in barns: ladders, grindstones, pitchforks, monkey wrenches, lawnmowers, snow shovels, axe handles, milk pails, water buckets, grain sacks, rusty rat traps. It was the kind of barn that swallows like to build their nest in. It was the kind of barn that children like to play in. And the whole thing was owned by Fern's uncle, Mr. Homer L. Zuckerman. Wilbur's new home was in the lower part of the barn, directly underneath the cows. Mr. Zuckerman knew that the manure pile was a good place to keep a young pig. Pigs need warmth, and it was warm and comfortable down there in the barn cellar on the south side. Fern came almost daily to visit him. She found an old milking stool that had been discarded, and she placed the stool in the sheepfold next to Wilbur's pen. Here she sat quietly during the long afternoons, thinking and listening and watching Wilbur. The sheep soon got to know her and trust her. So did the geese who lived with the sheep. All the animals trusted her. She was so quiet and friendly. Mr. Zuckerman did not allow her to take Wilbur out, and he did not allow her to get in the pig pen. But he told Fern that she could sit on the stool and watch Wilbur as long as she wanted to. It made her happy just to be near the pig, and it made Wilbur happy to know that she was sitting there right outside his pen. But he'd never had any walks, no rides, no swims. One afternoon in June, when Wilbur was almost 2 months old, he wandered out into the small yard outside the barn. Fern had not arrived at her for her usual visit. Wilbur stood in the sun, feeling lonely and bored. There's never anything to do around here, he thought. He walked slowly to his food trough and sifted to see if anything had been overlooked at lunch. He found a small strip of potato skin and ate it. His back itched, so he leaned against the fence and rubbed against the boards. When he was tired of this, he walked indoors and climbed to the top of the manure pile and sat down. He didn't feel like going to sleep. He didn't feel like digging. He was tired of standing still and tired of laying down. I'm less than 2 months old, and I'm tired of living, he said. He walked out to the yard again. When I'm out here, he said, there's no place to go but in. And when I'm inside, there's no place to go but out in the yard. That's where you're wrong, my friend, said a voice. Wilbur looked through the fence and saw a goose standing there. You don't have to stay in that dirty little yard, said the goose, who talked rather fast. One of the boards is loose. Push on it. Push on it, and come on out. What? Said Wilbur. Say it slower. At the risk of repeating myself, said the goose, I suggest you come on out. It's wonderful out here. Did you say that a board was loose? That I did, said the goose. Wilbur walked up to the fence, and he saw that the goose was right. One of the boards was loose. He put his head down, shut his eyes, and pushed. The board gave way. In a minute, he had squeezed through the fence and was standing on the long grass outside the yard. The goose chuckled. How does it feel to be free? She asked. I like it, said Wilbur. That's it. I guess I like it. Actually, Wilbur felt weird to be outside his fence, but nothing between him and this big world was wonderful. Where'd you think I'd better go? Anywhere you like, said the goose. Go down to the orchard, root up the sod. Go down to the garden, dig up the radishes, root up everything. Eat grass, look for corn. Look for oats, run all over, skip and dance, jump and prance. Go down to the orchard and stroll through the woods. The world's a wonderful place when you're young. I can see that, replied Wilbur. He gave a jump in the air, twirled, ran a few steps, stopped, looked around, sniffed the smell, and then set off walking through the orchard. Pausing in the shade of the apple tree, he put his strong snout to the ground and began pushing and digging and rooting. He felt very happy. He had plowed up quite a piece of ground before anyone noticed him. Mrs. Zuckerman was the first to see him. She saw him from the kitchen window and immediately shouted for the men. Homer! She cried. Pigs out! Larvae! Pigs out! Homer! Larvae! Pigs out! He's down there under that apple tree. Now the trouble starts, thought Wilbur. Now I'll catch it. The goose heard the racket, and she, too, started hollering. Run, 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 downhill. Make for the woods, make for the woods, she shouted to Wilbur. They'll never, never, never catch you in the woods. The Cocker Spaniel heard the commotion, and he came running from the barn to join the chase. Mr. Zuckerman heard and came out of the machine shed where he was mending a tool. Lurvy, the hired man, heard the noise and came up from the asparagus patch where he was pulling weeds. Everybody walked towards Wilbur, and Wilbur didn't know what to do. The woods seemed a long way off, and anyways, he'd never been down in the woods and wasn't sure if he would like it. Get around behind him, Mr. Lurvy, said Mr. Zuckerman, and dive towards the barn. And I'll take it easy. Take it easy. Don't rush him. I'll go get a bucket of slop. The news of Wilbur's escape spread rapidly among the animals on the place. Whenever any creature broke loose on the Zuckerman's farm, the event was of great interest of others. The goose shouted to the nearest cow that Wilbur was free, and soon all the cows knew. Then one of the cows told one of the sheep, and soon all the sheep knew. The lamb heard about it from their mothers. The horses in their star at the barn pricked up their ears, and they heard the goose hollering, and soon all the horses caught on to what was happening. Wilbur's out, they said. Every animal stirred and lifted its head and became excited to know that one of their friends had gotten free and was no longer pinned up or tied fast. Wilbur didn't know what to do or which way to run. It seemed though everybody was after him. If this is what it's like to be free, he thought, I believe I'd rather be pinned up in my own yard. The Cocker Spaniel was sneaking up on him from one side, and Lurvy, the hired man, was sneaking up on him from the other side. Mrs. Zuckerman stood ready to head off, and he stared at the garden, but now Mr. Zuckerman was coming towards him carrying a pail. This is really awful, thought Wilbur. Why doesn't Fern come? He began to cry. The goose took command and began to drive orders. Don't just stand there, Wilbur. Dodge about, cried the goose. Skip around, run towards me, slip in and out, in and out, in and out. Make for the woods, twist and turn. The Cocker Spaniel sprang for Wilbur's hind leg. Wilbur jumped and ran. Mr. Lurvy reached out and gasped. Mrs. Zuckerman screamed at Lurvy. The goose cheered for Wilbur. Wilbur dodged between Lurvy's legs. Lurvy missed. Wilbur grabbed and the Cocker Spaniel ran after him. Nicely done, cried the goose. Try it again. Run downhill, suggested the cows. Run toward me, suggested the gander. Run uphill, cried the sheep. Turn and twist, honked the goose. Jump and dance, said the rooster. Look out, Lurvy, cried the cows. Look out for Zuckerman, yelled the gander. Look out for the dog, cried the sheep. Listen to me, cried the goose. Poor Wilbur was dazed and frightened by all this commotion. He didn't like being the center of all this fuss. He tried to follow the instructions from the friends were giving him, but he just couldn't run downhill and uphill at the same time. And he couldn't twist and turn when he was jumping and dancing. And he was crying so hard he could barely even see what was happening. After all, Wilbur was a very young pig, not much more than a baby, really. He wished Fern were there to take him in his arms and comfort him. When he looked up and saw Mr. Zuckerman standing quite close to him holding a pail of warm slops, he felt relieved. He lifted his nose and sniffed. The smell was delicious. Warm milk, potato skins, wheat, Kellogg's cornflakes, a popover left over from the Zuckerman's breakfast. Come, pig, said Mr. Zuckerman, tapping the pail. Come, pig. Wilbur took a step towards the pail. No, said the goose. It's the old pail trick, Wilbur. Don't fall for it. He's trying to lure you back into captivity, ivity. He's appealing to your stomach. Wilbur didn't care. The food smelled appetizing. He took another step towards the pail. Pig, pig, said Mr. Zuckerman in a kind voice, and began walking slowly to the barnyard, looking all around innocently, as if he didn't know that the little white pig was following behind him. You'll be sorry, 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 called the goose. Wilbur didn't care. He kept walking toward that pail of slops. You're going to miss your freedom, honked the goose. An hour of freedom is worth a barrel of slops. Wilbur didn't care. When Mr. Zuckerman reached the pig pen, he climbed over the fence and poured the slops into his trough. And then he pulled the loose board away from the fence so there was a wide hole for Wilbur to walk through. Reconsider, reconsider, cried the goose. Wilbur paid no attention. He stepped through the fence and into his yard. He walked through and took a long drink of the slop, sucking the milk hungrily and chewing the pop over. It was good to be home again. While Wilbur ate, Lurvy fetched a hammer and some 8-penny nails and nailed the board in place. Then he and Mr. Zuckerman leaned lazily on the fence, and Mr. Zuckerman scratched Wilbur's back with the stick. He's quite a pig, said Mr. Lurvy. Yeah, he'll make a good pig, said Mr. Zuckerman. Wilbur heard the words of praise, and he felt warm milk inside his stomach. He felt the pleasant rubbing of the stick along his itchy back, and he felt peaceful and happy and sleepy. This had been a tiring afternoon. It was still only about 4 o'clock, but Wilbur was ready for bed. I'm really too young to go out in the world alone, he thought as he laid down.